So uh, let's pray before we begin. Speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. Amen. So before we begin, I wanted to mention some stuff that I have looked into and found out about recently over the last couple of days. I know that earlier we were talking about like historical evidence for stuff outside of the Bible. And we were a little bit disappointed perhaps that there's not as much stuff as we might like for stuff in this time period. But I did, over the last couple of days, learn some interesting stuff about the time of Abraham. There's some interesting stuff that seems to relate to some of the stories about Abraham. And it's also possible that there's some stuff that might have been discovered recently that might be related to David. I'll have to look more into that. There's like something discovered that might be like stables or something from his time, perhaps, in Jerusalem. So it's possible that he had those built. The two things that I learned about this week that are kind of interesting. One of them is there's actually another very small temple in Jerusalem that was discovered relatively recently, like the last 10 years or so, that is so old that it must have been used by Melchizedek, probably. So it's relatively small and was, it's sort of like near where the current Temple Mound is, but not exactly on the same spot. And so it's kind of interesting. If you guys want, I could send you a video about it later.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I saw something on YouTube, like might be what you said or something else, but like you said, it was small and was really old. And the guy, the Israelite archaeologic, whatever, specify, did not mention the name yet, but I think you mentioned that. I think I saw that on YouTube, something like that.
Yeah. So far, I haven't been able to find much about it other than like videos that are like interviewing the guy or like just quoting stuff that he said, or blog posts that are just like describing these videos. Like, I don't know necessarily like why there hasn't been like more stuff written about this. It's possible that it's because it's relatively recent, the discovery. Like it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. It's also possible that I just don't know like the official name of the site, and if I actually understood what the official name of the site was, then I could do more research about it. I keep getting like these sensational names for the place, like this is Temple Zero, the temple before the first temple. If you put that into Google, you don't get that many helpful results other than other videos similar to the one you just found. So I'm hoping to look more into that, but it's kind of an interesting thing to look into. Another one is that it's possible that we've found Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw something where basically it seems like we found a spot kind of like to the north of the Dead Sea where it looks like sometime around the time of Abraham, like basically based on the evidence that they have, which is like a whole bunch of buildings that seem to have been like blown off of their foundations, a bunch of like glass, the kind of glass that you get if like sand got really hot really quickly, just like exploded pottery, that sort of thing. Basically, it looks like what physically happened is sort of similar to the Tunguska event that happened in Russia over 100 years ago. But basically, a meteorite came from the sky and instead of hitting it, just sort of like exploded over it, which would result in like really hot rocks just like raining down on it.
Oh, wow.
As it says in Genesis, the Lord rained fire from the Lord out of heaven. So it seems to be that that is roughly what happened and that that's the spot. So those are some interesting archaeological discoveries.
I saw not long time ago about they was allowed to go to see in the Dead Sea,
Mhm.
Was a lot of salt and some archaeologic, whatever. They took a little submarine and they kind of bring like a 1,000 pound in the submarine. It's a two place, I think, little submarine, to make him sink
Mm.
because the salt
Yeah.
make it, and that submarine cannot
Oh,
like
yeah,
surface.
it
So
floats, yeah.
they put a lot of brick inside or block whatever, and they finally get it. And I see what they look like in the Dead Sea. It's anyway salty, but they saw some different figurine or sculpture or
Statues, yeah.
not statues, but uh, like a big bomb some place. But most of the place is pretty flat. But at that place, they like to see. There used to be something there, and anyway, they take picture of it and everything, and but they cannot see everything because they're gonna go and do surface because they because the Dead Sea, she's surrounded by different nation, and they're gonna have an accord for different those different places to go see and visit. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they're limited, but they're gonna go again until they get a permission to do it. Anyway,
Yeah.
it was interesting.
Yeah, the Dead Sea is a very interesting spot. If I remember correctly, on one side you've got Israel, and on the other side you've got Jordan. But you don't actually have anybody patrolling that area because they assume that if you tried to swim across, you would die before you get to the other side.
Ooh,
Because it's just too salty, like you just dehydrate and die.
your
Oh,
skin,
yeah.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Now you can swim in it for a little while, like I swim in it, but it is actually hard to swim because it floats so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
All right. So let's get into the text now. You could just read, I guess, the first section here, and we'll unpack that, I guess, and then move on from there.
Up until what, verse 8?
No, just even like the first verse, basically.
The first verse, okay.
Yeah.
So now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah.
All right. So Samuel is now dead. As Samuel said previously, he would not go to see Saul until the day of his death, and so he has not. We see here that there can be sort of like two different definitions of the word until, which is perhaps relevant to a different discussion. But there's the kind of until where when you get to the end, it happens, and the kind of until where when you get to the end, it doesn't happen. But Samuel is now dead, and so we can be fairly certain, although perhaps not entirely certain, that the rest of this was not written by Samuel. I mean, perhaps this is all prophecy, but it is an unnecessary hypothesis. So let's go on to verse 8, I guess.
Okay. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David.
So we see here that David's company has been sort of sojourning, perhaps with a group of shepherds that work for this Nabal. And they're hoping to get something in return for their kindly behavior towards them. Now, this does not bode well because the word Nabal, I'm pretty sure it means fool. So it's one of those names that you wonder, why does a parent give this to their child?
Yeah.
But I don't know, I knew parents who named their daughter Sapphira, as in like Ananias and Sapphira. They said, it's just a nice name, we like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, I wouldn't do it. And like, what can you say? Sometimes parents give their children interesting names. And we see that he's a Calebite. The Calebites were the descendants of Caleb from the Orah, who went with Joshua to go spy out the nations. And of course, Joshua and Caleb were the only Israelites who were alive and who were like fully adults at that point, who were allowed to enter the promised land, because after they returned with the 10 other spies, the 10 other spies brought a bad report, and all of Israel rebelled and said, no, we don't want to go to the promised land. And so only Joshua and Caleb, of all the adults, were allowed to live long enough to actually enter 40 years later into the promised land. And Joshua, of course, gets to be a great leader in Israel, and Caleb gets a special place to himself somewhere in the land of Judah. But this Nabal does not seem to have lived up to his ancestors' legacy. Or perhaps he will. We haven't gotten to that part yet. Who knows what will happen. Let's see. Let's go on to verse 17.
But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife.
Oh, sorry, we're at verse 9 right now.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where? So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, every man strap on his sword, and every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage.
Oh, you can keep going to verse 17, I guess.
Okay. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us, both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now, therefore, know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him.
So we have here a whole bunch of things going on. First, we see that this is a time of a certain amount of turmoil in Israel. As Nabal says, there are many men who are, many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. And I mean, you could say from a certain point of view that Nabal has a bit of a point that, probably Saul's enmity towards David is not some sort of unknown thing. But in fact, if Nabal took the side of David, there could be repercussions. Consider, for example, what happened to the priests at Nob. On the other hand, Um, David is very angry about this. And I mean, this is also understandable. I mean, he's treated his servants with nothing but respect. We see here that there are still 600 men with David, 400 men going up with David, while 200 remain with the baggage. But unfortunately, Nabal is a worthless man. Like earlier in the book, the phrase worthless man here actually is literally son of Belial. It's definitely understood later in the Jewish tradition that Belial is some sort of like demon or something. Now, whether this means that literally he was involved in some sort of like weird like pagan worship, or whether this just means that like he's a bad guy, I don't know. But certainly one would not want to be a son of Belial. Now, that being said, given that the last people that we heard about as sons of Belial were the sons of Eli, who were profaning the Lord's house, perhaps the fact that he is a son of Belial is not the greatest sign. So we will see what will happen here. You could continue on to verse 22.
Okay. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, "Go on before me, behold, I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, "Surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him."
So Abigail seems determined to provide some sort of mediatorial role here, but David, in the meantime, seems to be entering into a sort of rash state of anger. He's invoking some sort of oath, and it also seems, now the King James Version actually has the more literal translation of what David says in verse 22. And I don't know, because my grandma's in the other room, I'm not going to repeat what it says actually, but to boulderize it a bit, rather than men, what David says is someone who pees against the wall. So I don't know, he's breaking out his fancy language, so to speak.
Yeah.
He's not in a good mood. So we will see where this takes him. Could I get you to read up to verse 31?
Okay. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my lord regard this worthless fellow, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord, whom you sent. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant.
So we see here that Abigail is attempting to insert herself into the situation and to pacify David before he gets to her husband. I have some stuff to say about this, but perhaps we should get to the end of the chapter before we talk about that.
Okay.
Let's see. You could continue go. Let's see. Up to verse 38, I guess.
38. Okay. And David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you, who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feasts of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died.
Let's see. We actually see a bit of an interesting thing. You'll never guess what part of the Bible this is making me think of. The answer is Paul's letters to the Corinthians. If you remember from the beginning of the chapter, the reason that David wants to come up to Nabal's house is because there is a feast. It doesn't tell us which feast, but presumably this is some sort of religious feast. And David wants to celebrate it with Nabal, but Nabal says, no, I won't give you anything. You will go hungry, and I will apparently sit at home and eat and drink like a king. And so this reminds me of actually Corinthians, where Paul says, you guys are not celebrating the Lord's Supper properly. You guys are like bringing food from home, and then everybody just like eats the food that he brings, so that if somebody's rich, he like eats a bunch of food and then like gets drunk during the Lord's Supper. And he's like, this is why some of you are dying. And so you sort of see a parallel to this in the Old Testament. Now, we have here, I think in Abigail, a sort of picture of the church. It's not the clearest picture, I think, but we have a bit of a picture here of the church insofar as the church comes before Christ and pleads for the world. And, sometimes things turn out well and sometimes perhaps not so much. And in this case, things do not go over well for Nabal. But in a similar way, we also pray for the church that pray for the world that they will be converted away from evil. On the other hand, we also have here a picture of God's providential eye on David, that he keeps him from this wickedness. And sort of in a way that's similar to some of the patriarchs in the book of Genesis. They don't always do the right thing, and in some cases they demonstrably do the wrong thing. But at the same time, there's this sort of thing where God is looking out for them for the sake of the promise that he has made, to ensure the birth of the Messiah. He watches out for them in certain interesting ways. So we'll see that things are about to go fairly well for David, it seems. If you could continue on to the end of the chapter, and then we'll.
Yeah. Okay. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted on a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Galim.
So previously at Nob, David has said, "Indeed, women are kept from us, as they always are when we go out on a mission." But it seems that is the case no more. And so for completely different reasons, there were wealthy women that followed Jesus around, like I said, for completely different reasons. But it appears that there is a certain similarity here as well. Yeah, it's sometimes difficult for us perhaps to understand the weird situations that there are in the Bible, especially with regards to marriage, because we have like very romantic ideas of how it should go down. But I mean, basically, David has sort of ensured her well-being here.
It doesn't mention children, eh? She didn't have any children with Nabal, I guess.
It doesn't really seem like that. If she did, they are never mentioned. So, I mean, it's possible that she just didn't.
Makes me wonder if she'd had children, maybe David wouldn't have married her. I wonder about that.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, we don't really know. Yeah, so meanwhile, it appears that Saul has sort of unilaterally divorced his daughter and given her to another man. Now, strictly speaking, you could make a case that even from modern Christian ethics, Saul might have a case here, insofar as within the context of, like, Jesus says, like, only in a case of adultery, but it seems that generally speaking, this has been interpreted in sort of like a wider sense rather than like a strict narrow sense. And so something like the fact that David just sort of left her behind, and he never came back for her, could be seen as grounds of a sort of like spiritual adultery, perhaps. So Saul might have a leg to stand on here, although perhaps David intended to come back. Although if he did, it's been a long time. He's been away for an incredibly long time. So I don't know, sort of a weird aside there. But it appears that David is in fact increasing, even as Saul's generally not having a great time, as we'll see in the next chapter. And we'll see if any of these women bear David children that are relevant in the rest of the story. Although, of course, David's most prominent son is, of course, son of Bathsheba, who we will not see for a little while. Is there anything you guys want to look into before we move on to the next chapter?
No, that's good.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's move on to the next chapter. Let's see. Let's go to verse 12, I guess.
Okay. Right. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hashilah, which is on the east of Jeshimon?" So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill of Hashilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. But David remained in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed come. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, with Abner the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment, while the army was encamped around him. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Joab's brother Abishai the son of Zeruiah, "Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul?" And Abishai said, "I will go down with you." So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. And Abner and the army lay around him. Then Abishai said to David, "God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" And David said, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put up my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let us go." So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them.
So they are, it appears that we have a bit of a repetition here. One of the most important aspects of Hebrew poetry is the repetition. You know, you get the same thing and then basically the same thing in one verse. And so here David seems to be employing that in his daily life, trying to pull the same trick twice, so to speak. Now, a deep sleep from the Lord. This is actually the same kind of sleep that we're told the Lord puts Adam unto. So it's a sort of a divine anesthesia, if you will. They're well and truly asleep. I don't know entirely. Is sticking your spear in the ground good for the spear? I can't imagine that it is, but I don't know, so I'm not going to say. Although I will say that it takes kind of an interesting kind of guy to sleep with a spear stuck in the ground at his head. It just seems a little foreboding. Let's see. Now, Abishai is a bit of an impulsive character. We'll see him again later, but he seems a bit um, a bit prone to these kinds of things. And he is the brother of Joab, who is infinitely worse than him in every way, perhaps. I don't know. Joab is the kind of guy that the longer you read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, the further you get into the book, the more you wonder, why is Joab still working for David? Like, I don't know. It's like, they're just both trouble is what they are. Joab's the kind of guy that, like, you don't tell him to kill somebody, but he will do it. He's kind of a shady guy, and Abishai seems to be fairly similar. As we know, of course, David has been sort of surrounded by the people who are kind of at the bottom of society, for better or for worse. And so some of the people that are with him are maybe not his first choice.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Let's continue on from verse 13. Let's see. Go on to verse 20, I guess.
Okay. Then David went over to the other side and stood far off on the top of the hill, with a great space between them. And David called to the army and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, "Will you not answer, Abner?" Then Abner answered, "Who are you who calls to the king?" And David said to Abner, "Are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head." Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And David said, "It is my voice, my lord, O king." And he said, "Why does my lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, 'Go serve other gods.' Now therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth, away from the presence of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains."
So, yeah, so we have basically David pulling the same trick again. And by a trick, I mean showing that he could have killed Saul and didn't, and then protesting his innocence. So David does sort of make a bit of a point here, which is, to Abner, why were you not watching over your king? Like, is it because you were lazy, or because you didn't care whether he lived or died? Like, were you, are you incompetent, or do you just not care about him? And so we see that Saul's group is not quite as great as it could be, perhaps. David's pointing out, you are spending way too much effort on me, who is nobody and who's not hurting you at all. A single flea, like one who hunts the partridge in the mountains, that is way too much effort to spend on a partridge. Usually you would, set a trap for that kind of animal, not, hunt it around, like it's some sort of deer or something. So saying like this is way, way disproportional effort to the amount of harm that I'm not doing to you. But let's continue on to the end of the chapter.
Mhm. Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake." And David answered and said, "Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness, For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place.
So let's see. Saul does, in fact, admit that he has sinned. However, David, we will see, does not seem to have trusted him at all. David went his way and Saul returned to his place. And we will see in the next chapter that, David is not returning to Saul's palace or anything like that. I mean, it's understandable that David does not particularly trust him. Saul's mistake here is that he acted foolishly. And so he has been, in a way, like Nabal, who we just read about, who was also a fool, both in name and in action. But we see that the Lord is intent to secure David's safety for the sake of his promise. The little prayer that we have in the LSB here says, Saul again pursues David, who demonstrates that he is a faithful, forgiving servant. Jesus, the Son of David, directs us to forgive 70 times 7. He teaches this also by example, demonstrating his limitless forgiveness toward us. Dearest Jesus, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Grant us due patience with erring brothers and sisters. Amen.
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 But although David, is demonstrating forgiveness, he also demonstrates that forgiving somebody is not the same thing as trusting them necessarily, because he is not going to go back to Benjamin.
Mhm.
The next chapter says, then David said in his heart, now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. So that's where he's headed to next.
Mhm.
Yes, that is the end of the chapter this week. Is there anything that you guys wanted to look into for the end of our time?
Oh,
Okay, see, David is really patient against Saul. And not
Yeah.
a lot of people can do that.
Yeah, that does seem to be one of his qualities that seems to remain at all times, is that he is convinced that God will eventually give him the kingdom, even without his seizing it for himself. He is in that way much like Jesus, I suppose, as I mentioned last time. I think Jesus, according to Philippians, did not even consider equality with God something to be grasped, but took the form of a servant, being crucified on the cross.
So, are you going to be online for the meeting tomorrow?
Oh yes, there is a meeting tomorrow, isn't there?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to work something out then. That's usually when we have supper. But yeah, thanks for reminding me, because I definitely would have forgotten.
Yeah. I hope it's not going to be too long, because we have the French Bible study at 7. But I don't know if I'll make it.